Hi everyone, in this recording we're going to discuss the idea of binding data. So far we've used D3 to take a whole bunch of HTML elements that were already on a web page and modify their properties. But in a lot of data visualizations, we're going to want to start with essentially an empty page and then use a dataset to create brand new tags. You can imagine something like, if we want to build a scatter plot, we're going to have a whole bunch of objects in some array. This is going to be a representation of our data set. And we're going to need to convert that array into brand new circle tags, where each circle is going to be one point in the scatter plot. This is going to be really helpful so that you don't actually have to create the HTML tags manually. So let's see how we can do this in a very simple example. What I'm doing in this piece of code is I'm generating 100 random objects. This is saying just from 0 to 99, an array of length 100. This is a random number generator. So it's going to give us, it doesn't in itself contain any random numbers, but if I call it, right, like I'm calling it here, it's going to generate a random number between 0 and 500. And this last step, this map, you can think of it just like a for loop that's appending objects every time. I'm mapping over those 100 length array, and on each one of them, I'm generating a new object. This object has three properties, has an x property, a y, and a radius. So at the end, this u is an array of objects. Each object has these three keys. They're all random numbers. Why have I done that? I'm going to be using a data bind to create this kind of picture. So it's just random locations, circles with random radii. Okay, so this is all being accomplished with this code. Right. So let's just parse this line by line. At the very beginning, okay, we have this D3 select scatter. And if we look at the original HTML page, the original HTML page is this blank group called scatter. It has nothing inside of it, and it's within some SVG. Okay. Now, the counterintuitive thing, so when we select scatter here, the next thing we do is we select all circles, right? Now, this is really weird because in the original HTML page, we have no circles at all, right? But it's really important that we do this in D3 because it's going to tell us, it's in a way, it's kind of an anticipation for what we want to put on the selection. So by saying select all circle, it's trying to suggest, okay, even though there's no circles on this element, we might want to put some circles below this element. Okay. The way it actually does that is in combination with this .data of u and the .enter. Okay. What the technical meaning of a data bind is exactly just this call. It's taking the D3 selection and doing .data and an array following it. So it's saying, take my just selection of HTML tags and associate each of those tags with some objects in this array, this u. Right. Now what .enter is doing is it's making a comparison between everything in my D3 selection, all the HTML tags in my selection, with the array of data that I've just bound, this u. And when I do that calculation, I notice that there are 100 elements in my array, but there are no circles in my selection. Right? My selection's empty. So it's telling us that, okay, we might be able to create a whole bunch of new tags based on these data. So once we know that calculation, once we know that there's actually a lot more data than there are HTML tags in my selection, then it makes sense to append new HTML tags associated with each element in the data. Right, so that is this last part. I'm appending a circle associated with each of those elements. Okay, so if you looked at the HTML for this visualization, it's not going to look like this. It's actually, after running the JS code, it's going to be adding a whole bunch of circle tags under this. If you just stop the code here, you wouldn't actually see you wouldn't see this kind of picture. The reason is, on its own, the circle tag, you wouldn't see anything. It doesn't have any radii, it doesn't have any location. So they'd just be empty circle tags. So in order to actually visualize it on the screen, we need to set their attrs. Right? You think of this like encoding using AES in ggplot. These, the things on the keys, these are like the graphical attributes of the objects, the graphical marks. And then these are like the properties of the data. And it's mapping from the properties of the data to the attributes. And so it's taking the x coordinate from my object and converting it to the cx position of the circle. Okay, so that's the main idea. A little small extension, you can, once you have a data bind, you can select them all and modify them just like we've been doing before. So here I'm just showing a little example where it's animating the radius of the circles. How do you do something like this? So d3.timeout is useful whenever you want to do some sort of animation. It's just waiting for however long you specify. So in here I'm waiting 0.1 seconds and then calling some new function. What is the function that's being called? There's this animate function. I've defined it here. It calls itself recursively. What does animate do? It just converts the radius to this new radius value, which is some periodic kind of oscillating function of time. So that's why the radii are getting larger and smaller and larger and smaller. And then once I've modified the data, I can select all the circles and I bind the new data set to the set of circles. I don't have to do .enter anymore because all my circles are already on the page. I don't need to append any new circles. I just need to change the attributes of the existing circles. So I've modified the data and I changed the attribute according to this new radius. And that's all. So it creates a little animation instead of just appending a bunch of static HTML.